Make my life at work miserable? You'll never work again with me. I used to work at a medium-sized IT services company and had recently been moved to a smaller branch office with a nice pay raise. I was basically my own team and got to do interesting work on a large project. Since they were satisfied with the work but needed it done in a larger scale, the company hired another person to help me. Meet Fred. I knew Fred from outside work through common relationships, and I didn't find him any weirder than other nerdy people in the business. Oh boy, Fred was good at technical work, very good. When it came to human interactions, though, it was something else. Fred thought of me as his only friend in the workplace and would itch all day long about all other colleagues, who were all equally incompetent, weird, evil, and generally deserving of his scorn. Fred had a terrible tendency of telling other people we had to work with that they were doing things wrong and that their software was crap, which was often technically right, but completely forgetting the constraints in which other people had to work, and that there might have been reasons for things that now sounded awful, which is basically always the case in IT. People resented both of us as a team for things he said, and some situations became entrenched. It was getting harder every day for me to get to work. Eventually he made a lot of enemies and he got a meeting with the division director. It only lasted for a few minutes, during which he told the boss of 800 people that he was an evildoer. It was his last day in the company. I worked alone from that time and managed to finish most of the project, soothing things over with other teams. A few months later I got an offer for the job of my dreams in a huge utility company. After starting the work, guess who I discover working right here as a contractor under my direct supervision? Fred. Fred looked so happy to find a friend again. He spent most of my first day at work telling me how the company was awful. Everyone was dumb and everything was insufferable. I went home that night feeling horrible, wondering how much of what he told me was true and how bad it would be to work there. Turns out, after a few hard starting days, it really was the job of my dreams. Acting now with Fred as a client and not a colleague, I managed to keep him in check and to improve a lot the perceived quality of the team's work. Prior to my hiring, Fred was basically telling people to duck off whenever they were asking him things he didn't want to work on. Having someone who could see through his bullet to manage him got the roadmap back on track. Eventually I learned that my colleagues had been very wary about working with me at the beginning, because Fred had been badmouthing me from the day he learned I had been hired to manage him. This had made the first weeks difficult until they understood he had been lying about it all. About 2 years later, I was now team manager and my boss comes in my office and asks me about a hiring issue. There's a new position in the team, and the recruiter asked him about someone with excellent technical skills but who sounded very arrogant. Guess who wanted to work as my colleague again? If you've followed the story, you've got it right. I did not let out to my boss the slightest bit of resentment. I explained him how he was a very competent person, but that he might just lack a bit of the skills required for our company's teamwork. I knew exactly what I had to say for my boss to never want to hire him. Ever. Without making it about our personal history. I only told what happened to a close coworker and he sounded very thankful to hear that he would not have to work with Fred as a colleague. A few months later, his company lost the contract and Fred was hired by the new contractor. However, they were not as lenient with him as the previous company was. And another few months later I was finally Fred-free. Last I heard of him, he was working at a Silicon Valley giants, on a project that was in a worldwide media itstorm over technical issues. I keep wondering whether he was telling everyone else in his team how bad at their job they were and how much he contributed to that massive failure. Ex-boss assaulted me and invokes the wrath of my friend. I spent 2 years working for a particular boss, who I'll call Dan. Dan was, and almost certainly still is, the most unacceptable human being I have ever had the displeasure of encountering. He was a compulsive liar, a narcissist, short-tempered, unethical, unreasonable, unintelligent, and abusive. I once witnessed him spend half an hour shouting at a salesman for wearing shoes that Dan didn't approve of. Not inappropriate shoes, mind you, but just ones that Dan didn't like. The salesman in question could have gone home and changed his shoes in the time that Dan spent cursing him out and belittling him. He also sold a client second-hand computers, claiming they were new, and priced as new ones. This man not only assaulted me, but verbally and emotionally abused me for the better part of 2 years. And did everything in his power to keep me under his thumb. He constantly micromanaged me, to the point of just dictating to me what I should write in an email to a client. If it wasn't done exactly his way, it wasn't correct. I had to argue with him just to get a goddamn sick day, even though I'm legally entitled to it. I was woefully underpaid, and on call 24/7. This made it difficult for me to find other employment, and is one of the reasons I stayed as long as I did. He made my life absolutely miserable, and I developed a bit of a drinking problem as a result. I recently watched a presentation on domestic violence, and his behavior is a textbook case of what DV abusers do. I could go on and on about the things that this man did to be the biggest asshole he could be. But this is pro-revenge, not bad bosses, so I'll get to the story. One day, Dan and I had a disagreement about something. I was right. And I had the emails to prove it. And I was frankly fed up with his bullet. I told him I wouldn't be going to work because I was taking a sick day. He proceeded to shove me down to the ground. He's a big guy. Probably one of the reasons he's gotten away with being the human garbage he is for so long. And starts trying to strangle me. I was able to fend him off and escape, and after I did I filed a police report. There were no witnesses. So that was going to go nowhere. He actually had one of his other subordinates make a claim that the alleged assault didn't happen. Said subordinate wasn't there at the time, so false report. I naturally told everyone I knew, and all his clients that contacted me afterward. I was their primary IT support. So quite a few of them had my personal number, that I had filed a police report against him for assault. I specifically said it that way because unlike simply claiming that he assaulted me, telling people I filed a report was unarguably true and not slanderous. A lot of his clients were already not happy with the services he provided, internet and PBX. So that certainly turned a lot of them off of renewing their contracts. A very close family friend of mine, Carol, was naturally one of the first to hear about the assault. I left the country about a month later in search of better opportunities. But my friend remained, and became the chairman of the board of trustees for the body corporate of the neighborhood where Dan lived. A body corporate is basically like an WA, but with different laws governing them. She set her sights on making his life hell. Dan had a broken down car that had been broken down for over a year at that point. He never had the money to fix it. Because he's a itty businessman who never seemed to realize that his business model had really tiny profit margins. And the rules of the neighborhood were changed to force broken down cars to be towed away. If the owner didn't tow it, the body corporate would, and charge the owner, and fine them. So Dan was fined a few times, not small amounts either. And when he was fined, he did what he always does when things don't go his way, throw a ducking tantrum while having no leg to stand on. The tantrum in this case was several expletive-filled emails to the body corporate, which is just such a great way to endear yourself to someone who already hates you. Which got him fined again for breaking the conduct code. This, combined with the loss of revenue for his business, has led to him not having any substantial income for over half a year now. He has no car, nor the money to buy one. Several of his big clients are definitely not going to renew contracts with him. And he appears to no longer have any staff in his employ. Nobody's seen anyone coming to his house in months now, and the body corporate is pressuring his landlord to evict him. He's well and truly ducked. I'm living happily in another country now, and got an awesome job that pays 20 times what working for him did. Yes, really, 20 times more money. That's how little I made under him. TLDR, boss assaults me and thanks to a friend of mine. His business failed and he is on the verge of eviction. Edit, First Silver. Thank you, kind mystery donor. Update, I've been informed that Dan was found dead in his home. The police have determined that it was not accidental or natural death, but murder. The rest of the details are still unclear, but I can only presume that he finally picked a fight with someone who could go toe-to-toe with him. And lost. Don't shoot near my horse. Your family will hate you when we tell them. I'm sorry if this is in the wrong place, but the revenge did happen, just not immediately. It's not huge revenge, but it was pretty satisfying. I have been writing for close to 20 years and love every moment of it. I was taught by a close friend and still ride with her to this day. Backstory: I was over at her place and tacked up 2 of her horses. One was named Tiger and the other D. I was on Tiger at first, but she was misbehaving, so T switched with me and I hopped onto D. We were going through the back hills and came across asshole 1 to 3. That's where things begin. T and I came up over a hill and we could see a small group of guys that were shooting at targets. We stopped and waited for them to motion us past, which is polite with horses, and they didn't stop. Tiger is really laid back while D is a good girl. She's just young, so she gets nervous, but she's a sweet little thing. She's a pony technically, but still a good girl. T whistled to them and they looked over and we motioned that we wanted to go by. They flipped us off and ignored us after that. Now T has gotten feistier with age, so she looked at me and I'm visibly boiling, so we decided to wait and show them that we weren't backing down. I was in the left of T, and after a few minutes we were considering walking behind them since we have permission to walk through the landowner's property. Now called low. We were about to move when I looked up and one of the guys had shifted his stance and shot off a couple of rounds. I heard one ricochet off the metal around the targets, and we heard it and then saw it hit the ground a couple of feet away. I stared for a second and was wheeling D around as the men laughed and T let loose with a few choice words and we took off. Little pony can run like hell when needed. Tiger was fat at the time, but she was up D's tail as we fled. We stopped halfway up the next hill and I could tell T was livid. I was trying to calm D as Tiger panted and I was raging once we all calmed. T was on her phone and jumped off. She gave me Tiger's reins while she walked the half-quarter mile back to take photos of asshole 1 to 3. She stomped back and we went a different direction to go around them and finish our ride. We got back to her house and she asked if I was okay with tacking out Tiger while she made a few calls. I told her I'm fine and she walked off. I could hear shouting from her house all the way to the barn, but I didn't say anything since it was better that I didn't call about it. She came out after a half hour or so. She called Lo and he was furious. His nephew was watching the property and he asked if could go shooting on his little DIY shooting range. Lo told him to always yield to the horse riders in the area since he didn't want us hurt. T went to talk to him to show him the photos of asshole 1 to 3 and he confirmed asshole 1 was the one with the rifle. Lo had cut his vacation short to come back and get it sorted out. I didn't see what happened, but according to T, the nephew got his ass kicked by Lo and his family shunned him for about 6 months due to the danger he put us and our horses in. If one of the horses had been hit we would have ended up on the ground at the least. He was banned from Lo's property for the rest of his life. Asshole's family brought us apology gifts of wine and a few gift cards to the local tack shop. I went to get a new halter for my horse since he broke it again, and the gift card had $200 on it. Sorry for the length, but T and I were chatting and we were talking about all the stupid things people do around horses and it came up. Thank you for reading. Enjoy your weekend. Edit. Thank you Anonymous for the silver. Edit. Thank you so much for the gold. Wow. Cheat your employee out of a $2 raise? That will be $20,000. This is from MNPR story at the bottom. Several years ago, when he was in college, Chris worked as a lifeguard at a water park in Cincinnati. After about a year, his bosses promoted him to a managerial role and promised him a raise. His new duties were more than just keeping an eye on the water. Chris managed the daily schedule for all lifeguards and tested the water's chemical levels. Each morning when he opened the park, he would be the first one down its water slides, testing them for safety. More than 6 months into his new position, Chris' paycheck remained the same, $8 an hour instead of the $10 he was promised. Week after week I would ask about it, he says, and management would keep making excuses. Then came a corporate announcement. Chris' managers said they would cut employees' pay by 10% due to financial difficulties. Chris felt slighted. Now his pay was less than what he started out earning. Despite his managerial duties, I decided, okay, if they really don't care about me and they don't value me and what I do for the water park, then maybe I'll just stop doing it, he says. So on a busy summer day, Chris didn't show up to open the park. He let the flood of subsequent texts and voicemails from his managers go unanswered. No one else with his level of training was able to come in that morning. I ultimately caused the shutdown of the water park for that Friday. Chris says, he estimates he cost the park between $15,000 and $20,000 in customer revenue, for what would have been a yearly raise of a few $1,000s. Soon after he ghosted, Chris landed a job making more money as a pizza delivery driver. He now works for a Fortune 500 company. Thanks for the sidewalk. My friend ran his own masonry business for many years. When he retired he turned the business over to his son and moved to a smaller house in a different town. About a year later the town announced a plan to install sidewalks on his street and solicited bids for the job. His son submitted a bid. The supervisor of public works rejected it. He claimed that since property owners would eventually pay for the work via a special assessment, his participation was a conflict of interest. The winning bid was significantly higher than his son's. He did some research and found that they were in the middle of a 10-year plan to install sidewalks throughout the town. All the contracts were awarded to the same 3 contractors on what appeared to be a rotating schedule. To an impartial observer it might look like the contractors were taking turns submitting the low bid. But of course that would be illegal. There really wasn't anything he could do. Collusion and price fixing are very hard to prove. When work commenced he kept an eye on the progress. At first it was just professional curiosity. But he saw that corners were being cut, so he started photographing the work. When he saw, for example, that the amount of sub-base was less that required by code, or the concrete was too thin, he reported it to the contractor and the town. They said that he must be mistaken since the building inspector was on top of things. But for the duration of the project he didn't see the inspector once. Who knows, maybe he does his inspections at night. Then things got nasty. The cement truck accidentally drove across his lawn and wiped out his wife's rose bushes. Another time a truck accidentally took out his mailbox. Evidently the building inspector signed off on the job because the contractor was paid and the town sent out the assessment notices. His came to more than $6,000. He hired a licensed engineer who inspected the work and found numerous deviations from the spec. His attorney appealed the assessment, citing the engineer's report, the photographs and a record of all the complaints he filed. His neighbors also appealed their assessments. The town had no choice but to suspend the assessments while the matter was investigated. They sued the contractor, and put the rest of the sidewalk plan on hold. The supervisor of public works and the building inspector suddenly resigned. 3 years later the sidewalk is still there, although it has sagged and cracked just where he predicted. He and his neighbors haven't paid a dime.